Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here today. My name is Britney Penouilh. I'm an interdisciplinary artist, which means I work in a variety of mediums to engage in dialogue with other disciplines. And for me specifically, that other discipline is geology. I have a background in geology as well as fine art. And the work integrates painting and sculpture and etchings. And it's a variety of things that illustrates Earth through time, the geological history, the cultural history, the mining history. So I spent 2 weeks in the desert in Zizix. I was living there. So it was 2 weeks in the middle of the summer because I wanted an authentic desert experience, which meant like 120 degrees. No one is there. It was really pretty crazy, but I felt like I learned a lot. I know a lot about myself and like my personal limitations and maybe just like in general human limitations. And so I had to adjust like my schedule based on that, like eating or even like exploring into the desert. I would map out locations, what I wanted to see, and then I'd go out and take pictures and do sketches and write. And I really had to, the first day I did that, I left early in the morning and I got out there and the sun's coming down and it's so hot and I have to like pull over and just kind of take a break. And a park ranger stopped and was like, "Are you okay? Like, you're the only one that's out here in the middle of the day. It's 120 degrees. Like, what are you doing here?" It's like, "Oh, I'm an artist." And he's like, "Okay, got it. I'll keep an eye on you," which I made a lot of friends because of that, the park rangers and such. I did do another park residency, but it wasn't actually related to the national park system. It was in Lake Clark, Alaska, which was literally the opposite experience from desert to, the Arctic. Um, but both landscapes and experiences had a tremendous effect on me and my practice. Just, the way time passes in these places and the intensity of the climate and the environment and just kind of like absorbing those things and just kind of being in those spaces.
Hi, everyone. I'm Christine Huhn. I'm a photographer currently living in San Francisco. My work is research informed, utilizing my backgrounds in photography and historic preservation. My process is fairly slow. I survey the area and use a medium format camera. My larger camera setup usually draws some attention. So while I was working in Mojave, lots of people stopped me and were really excited that I'm a little bit younger and I'm shooting with film and printing in the darkroom. And I had some really cool conversations while I was out in the park. I didn't go in the summer because I have a really heavy pack and hiking was hard enough. And I went in March and it was still pretty hot. I'm basically grew up in a national recreation area. So I was learning photography in high school by photographing in the park. So after college and working as a product photographer for a few years, I had an opportunity to volunteer in the Park Service at the Delaware Water Gap, where I learned about photographic documentation as a means for preserving cultural heritage. And then I pursued a master's in historic preservation and been focusing my work in the national park system ever since. So this was my first residency in a national park, but anyone that knows me, I'm pretty obsessed with national parks. So it was a tremendous opportunity, especially in the desert, to get to do this. I had only been to the desert once before I applied, but immediately felt compelled to capture the rapidly changing landscape. I'm really drawn to fragile places and their ephemeral nature. The desert, including its vastness and the diversity, and Mojave especially, is unique as a preserve and being used continually by humans really drew me to apply to the residency program. I spent about 10 consecutive days in the park. I didn't stay at Zysix because I went during spring break, so it was like really crowded there. So I stayed in an Airstream trailer, like on the edge of Las Vegas. So I kind of like was driving back and forth, but it was really interesting being in the desert and driving back and forth through there because I'm from the East Coast. So it's just really different in and of itself. It's just such a strange place.
So I was in the desert in March, and I spent 10 days consecutively, or no, 10 days, 2 weeks consecutively there. And I was drawn to the residency for a number of reasons. I actually, opposite of Christine, I grew up on the West Coast and now am settled on the East Coast. So I'm in Pittsburgh currently, but I was born in Salt Lake City and grew up in Las Vegas. And so I'm very, very familiar with the desert, and I find I have a great longing for it. I can't ever find the same satisfaction in the landscape here on the East Coast that I do when I'm out West. I haven't ever done another residency in a national park, although I did do an extended camping trip and did a bunch of work about Joshua Tree National Park when I was 20 years old. And then I took the opportunity with my Mojave National Preserve, and I set it around my 40th birthday. So I've sort of made these markers in my artistic life around the desert. And so I was there celebrating my 40th birthday out in the desert, which felt really, really right for me. Edward Abbey said that in the American Southwest, he began a lifelong love affair with a pile of rocks. And I really relate to that idea. I draw a lot of rocks, and I always have. I'm out here living in this like lush green landscape, and I'm drawing like the most desolate looking rocks, and I can't stop doing it because I love it so much, and it's in my DNA, it's in my blood. The residency just fit in so beautifully with what I already think about all the time, which is rocks and the desert and all of those beautiful things out there. I just can't get enough of it. So when I was there in March, like Christine, it was still warm. I can't believe, Brittany, that you were there in the summer. Oh my gosh. It was pretty temperate. It was okay. I stayed in the hole in the wall campground for a little bit, and Gabe got me a last minute, a couple nights in Zizek's as well, which I thought was strange and wonderful. But, and I spent a night also in my car because my tent blew in half at the Hole in the Wall campground. I was out there every day, walking, driving, camping, looking around. My process, I do some sketching, a little bit of writing, and then a lot of photographing, and just kind of thinking, and then take that all back into the studio to create the work.
Well, my main art medium is wood cut prints, and what I do is I transfer a drawing, or I draw right on wood, and then I'll carve it with small gouges, and then after the image is carved, I will ink it and then run it through a printing press, and so each one is hand printed. I've done 4 art residencies, and the reason, it feels complicated, the reason I ended up in wanting to do the Mojave residency. About 3 years ago, I moved back to California. I'd been away from California for 25 years. In the 14 years prior to moving to California, I was in Florida. And I ended up I was drawn to Florida, particularly for the swamps. I was really busy with work and with teaching, and I didn't have much time to get back down to the Everglades. And so I just needed to get out and explore the rural areas that were closest to me. And that turned out to be my backyard, which was the Lake Wells Ridge. I literally lived across the street from it. It's harsh. It's like a miniature desert in surrounded by tropical landscape. And when I retired from my college position, I knew I was going to come back to California. And so my work is, the through line through my work is connected with plants. It's like, as soon as I get to a location, I want to learn about all the plants that are there. And so I was thinking about a residency, and the Mojave one just was a good fit. Wasn't too far to drive from Camarillo, and I really wanted to then immerse myself in California habitats, and the desert was drew me. I was drawn to the desert because I was already thinking about the desert-like landscape. I spent about 2 weeks in the Mojave National Preserve. And I have to tell you, listening to what some of the other artists experienced, I had a very cushy experience. I think because I got to stay in the park ranger dormitory, and it was brand new, I think, and there were 4 park rangers, and I had my own room. It was air conditioned, nice kitchen, and it was great. It was right near the Kelso Depot Visitor Center. So I was already in the middle of the park when I woke up. I could just get up, at the crack of dawn and then drive anywhere I wanted to and be there. So my game plan was to have a plant guide and a map, and to explore and see as much of the preserve as I could within 2 weeks. And I pretty much just wanted to, I followed where the plants would be blooming by the elevation, and so I saw a lot of the highlights. If we drive down Kelbaker Road, one of the main roads, you could see primrose and desert mallow and all those blooming. And I made it over to Kelso Dunes and then the Teutonia Peak Trail. So I got up to the higher elevations where I could explore what was blooming at that elevation, and then over to Mid Hills and Hole in the Wall Campground. So I just was completely every day, just had a whole day packed full of exploring as much and seeing as much of the preserve as I could. I went pretty self-contained. I carry a backpack with, I like to sketch on site. I feel like my strongest work comes from when I've sketched on site, but I usually don't have enough time to see as much and sketch as much as I can. So I take a lot of photographs and also work from my own photographs. And then I would go back to the dormitory at night. It was great because I could sit down and have dinner. There'd usually be another park ranger having dinner there. I'd bring out my plant book and we could talk about plants. He would give me some tips on where to look for plants. Now, the one thing that's really interesting with, there aren't very many real trails in the preserve. So he would tell me about, little off the road places off the main road where I might see barrel cactus, or I might see Mojave mound cactus, things like that. So I got, it was really fun to come back, and I wanted to then see, what I had done during the day. And it was really nice to also have that kind of companionship there as well. But out in the desert, I have to say, I pretty much saw no one when I was out there. I was, drive out there and I might see 1 or 2 other hikers, but no, it felt, I was out when I went driving and sketching out in different places. I didn't really see many people at all.
It gave me sort of a good focus in a time when it's hard to find focus. So I'm eternally grateful for the residency. And so I think it's going to affect my practice. I can't really tell how many ways, but I really think it's going to affect it in a lot of ways. But it was especially helpful to just go back to that landscape work that I loved making so much in past projects. Going west is always a good thing for me. I'm always happy to go out there, no matter how many years have gone by since I've lived out there. It's always going to feel like going home. So, even though I hadn't ever been to Mojave National Preserve itself, that landscape feels like going home. So it very much felt that way when I was there.
When I got out there, I wanted to know all of the history, like what happened to shape the land in this way. And, I really dove into that, like the research wise. And understanding that is what really, it's what informed the work that I created. But before I was working, I was doing landscapes, but it didn't feel as intimate of a relationship with understanding those processes. It became a study about rocks that then became a study about humans and us existing in this environment and how the environment has influenced our experience directly.
I have a background in history and preservation, so I'm also interested in geologic time and what's happening, and that's why the landscape is changing so much. So when I was, I really was focusing on like the geologic portions, and I feel really fortunate that I was focusing on SEMA Dome too, because since I'm doing documentary photography, I have that whole landscape photographed, and previous to the fires. I haven't had a chance to get back yet. I'm actually dying to do a post fire, like photographing. The one part about Mojave that I really appreciate is the solitude in the landscape. It was nice to be in the landscape and really absorb everything. I think that really translated into my work, that I was able to be there and just like absorb it and be by myself. I took a lot of like solitary photographs of the Joshua trees in like such a dense forest. I singled some trees out because I just wanted them, it like kind of just be how my experience was. Gabe's a film photographer too, so that was really cool, that like being together, because we kind of played off each other, and we were with our friend Dan too, who's also a film photographer. So it was nice, the three of us, to be there, like kind of photographing at the same time but different things. We all have the same medium, and it was interesting how we photographed different things.
It was a very solitary experience. And I wanted to fill it and see as much as I could. And then when I came back to start the artwork, I had a very difficult time starting the artwork. It was like I had experienced something very intense, but it was so different from my everyday life. And I couldn't quite get like what was the feeling that I had experienced in the desert. I feel like I couldn't capture that. It was the period of COVID and having to be in a kind of solitary experience where I really was able to process my experience of being in the desert with a lot of alone time. The process of the year of COVID slowed me down to almost the rhythm that I think I felt in the desert.
The time in the Mojave prepared us well for COVID. That degree of isolation.
Yeah. I couldn't quite jump back in. And I felt the same way kind of coming out of COVID, where you're kind of getting reoriented to a more busy life. I was like pretty obsessed with the yucca. And in fact, I showed them to a few of the artists here at the studios, and they were like, yeah, but what did the desert look like? I just kept showing them like sketches of and some woodcuts of the yucca. And it would be like, yeah, but what was the desert like? And I think because the plants also to me suggest the process of growth, the way they lean, the way they've moved and bent, and some of them just seem, you can see how they've lived through the weathering and the years, and they suggest the way the shapes and the plants and the way they move in the landscape. They suggest stories, they suggest emotions.
So earlier on, you had said that it was very intense, the experience, and it was hard to just start making work. And that's exactly my experience there. It was like I felt like a sponge, just absorbing. And I would start to make some work, but I was mostly doing the same thing, journaling where I was going, what time of day. I was also putting the temperature because it was so extreme. And then like people along the way, or if I met animals. And but it felt like as soon as I left the desert, as soon as that experience was sort of on pause, because I did go back. So consecutively, I was there for 2 weeks, and then I went back a few weekends, and I'd been there at different seasons. But it's like, it's like once I've left or ended that experience, that all the ideas came, or that I could start to, figure out how to formulate that inspiration and into something tangible. So I was totally relating to what you were saying, Mollie. It's great.
I want to agree with both Britney and Mollie as well about that. I did have a hard time getting the work started when I got home, I think for the very same reasons. It's interesting that we're all having sort of a similar experience. I made a body of work when I did get going, and made a body of work for my 2020 show. And got it all ready, and then 2020 got canceled, and so I haven't had my show yet. And so I started from scratch and started a new body of work over. So I've kind of made two. And I think that it's a real gift, actually, because I think that as time goes on and the experience settles into my brain more and just into my emotions and into my sort of like artist mind, like that the second body of work is different. And the three that are there now are from the second body of work. So, I have lots of stuff. I have lots of drawings about the Mojave. I'm overflowing with Mojave drawings because I'm kind of making two different bodies of work. So, and I think I'll probably continue to do that. And that's not unusual for me to like sort of go down some different lines, but so it'll be fun when I have my show to be able to pick and choose and decide like what it is that I want to show and how they're different and what the meaning of that is. I don't know yet.
I know that the landscapes that I have spent, what you would call kind of like deep time, are a part of me, and they become like part of the it's like part of my history, being alive, so that when I go to another landscape, it'll relate to what I've done in the Mojave. How does it compare to the Mojave? I mean, I think, and I still am in the middle of this. I mean, I'm scheduled to have a show through the preserve in 2022. So I'll be working on this really for another year.
I expressed how much I love the Mojave, and I was missing the parks, and I recently bought a small piece of land in 29 Palms so I can have more access to the desert. But yeah, I agree with what Mollie just said about the desert sort of living inside of you and those experiences, those very alive experiences. So yes, I agree with that.
I'm like totally obsessed with the desert now. It's like everyone's thing now that if we go, the only two places I went during the shelter in place was Joshua Tree and Death Valley. I was like, oh, I just want to go to the desert to get out of San Francisco. It's interesting that Natalie started to do a second body of work, because even though I've had my show already, I'm revisiting images that I didn't use before, and I'm creating a new body of work through like historical photographic processes, cyanotypes and gum bichromate printing. So I'm going to do something more. I'm definitely going to go back to Mojave, I think, in the next couple of months and start shooting some new things. It solidified my interest in time in my work, that I think it showed me what I'm actually doing in my work when I went to Mojave. I'm like, okay, I'm photographing landscapes in the national parks. Well, okay, that's fine. I'm literally photographing time and how it's changing. And I think that my time there really helped me realize that. Also, my new body of work, I'm focusing specifically on the geologic formations and the abstract qualities of them. So like while it's a documentation of, it's also kind of making my work more abstract, which is a little bit newer for me too.
I sort of think of each of my drawings as a love letter to the desert. And it's funny because I think about it as sort of an unrequited love, because the desert, doesn't love you back. Like it's 120 degrees, right, Brittany? Or it's like your tent gets smashed. So it's this relationship that I have of like always wanting to go back. Like sometimes it feels unhealthy, but at the same time, it's like it's such an important piece of who I am as an artist and as a person. And I will always give the desert another chance. I will always give another chance, and I'll always do another drawing of the desert. So it's gonna affect my practice in profound ways. Yeah.